Have you ever walked into a room and just stood there, completely forgetting what you went in for? Have you ever been in the middle of a story and suddenly lost a word you have used thousands of times, as if it just vanished from your mental drawer? Have you ever finished reading a paragraph and realized you have absolutely no idea what you just read? You call it forgetfulness. You call it being busy, being tired, or just getting older, and you move on. But here is the thing that no one is placing right next to those moments to tell you straight to your face. Researchers at Brown University are now calling Alzheimer's disease type 3 diabetes, not because it has the same symptoms as diabetes, but because when they analyzed the brain tissue of Alzheimer's patients at a cellular level, they found the exact same molecular mechanism that happens in the muscle and liver cells of type 2 diabetic patients: insulin resistance in the brain. It is not a metaphor. It is not just a statistical correlation. It is the exact same biological mechanism, and that means what your blood sugar is doing to your brain right now. Not 10 years from now, not when you are older, but right now, is writing the very first chapters of a story that your doctor will not read until changing the outcome becomes incredibly difficult. Over the next 11 minutes, I am going to show you the exact mechanism behind this. Why the blood sugar test you get every year fails to measure what matters most, and the specific steps you can take to change what is happening right now. Let us decode this. Your brain is a city with 86 billion neurons, each one acting as an individual power plant, running continuously 24 hours a day, never turning off. That city consumes 20% of your body's total energy, even though it only accounts for 2% of your weight. To do that, it needs a fuel distribution system that works perfectly. The fuel is glucose. The distribution system is insulin. And insulin does not just transport fuel. It is the key that opens the door to every single power plant so glucose can get inside and be turned into energy. Without insulin working properly, glucose piles up outside the door. The power plant sits right in front of an abundant food supply but cannot use it. And when enough power plants in the same area start starving for fuel, that neighborhood begins to dim. What most people do not know, and what no doctor explains when handing you your blood sugar test results, is that the brain can develop insulin resistance completely independently from the rest of the body. Your blood sugar can look perfectly fine on paper, while certain areas of your brain have already begun losing their ability to receive fuel. By the 7-minute mark, you will understand why the test you take every year completely misses it. For decades, neuroscience assumed that the brain operated independently of insulin, that glucose entered the brain without needing the same mechanism as other tissues in the body. That was wrong. The brain has its own insulin receptors, and they are most densely concentrated in two specific regions: the hippocampus, the center for short-term memory formation, and the prefrontal cortex, the center for decision-making, planning, and abstract thinking. Insulin in the brain does not just coordinate glucose uptake. It regulates the formation of new synaptic connections, protects neurons from inflammation, and controls the cleanup mechanism for toxic proteins that accumulate over time. When insulin receptors in the brain start losing their sensitivity due to chronic exposure to repeated glucose spikes, long-term systemic inflammation, or chronic sleep deprivation, neurons no longer receive adequate insulin signals. The key is still there, but the lock has changed. Glucose piles up outside the door. Neurons begin operating at a lower energy level, not completely shutting down but fading out, little by little. You experience that as brain fog. It is not an obvious medical symptom. It is just a subtle drop in mental sharpness, in processing speed, and in the ability to find the right word at the right time. And now we come to the part where the story becomes impossible to ignore. Amyloid beta, the signature protein plaque found in the brains of Alzheimer's patients, does not just appear for some mysterious, unexplained reason. A healthy brain constantly produces and clears away amyloid beta through enzymes that depend directly on insulin signaling. When insulin signaling in the brain weakens, those enzymes become less efficient. Amyloid is not cleared out fast enough, and it begins to accumulate. It is not because the brain is broken. It is because the cleanup system is lacking the signal it needs to run at full capacity. But here is the part that makes this story truly uncomfortable, because all of this does not start when you get diagnosed. It begins much earlier than you think, and during that entire window, none of the tests your doctor is running can see it. By the time a person is first diagnosed with Alzheimer's, their brain has already undergone 15 to 25 years of measurable changes, leading up to that moment. Studies using positron emission tomography scans to track brain glucose metabolism over decades show that the decline starts in people between 45 and 50 years old, sometimes even earlier. There are no symptoms. There are no warning signs that a regular doctor would catch during a routine physical exam. It is just quiet biochemical changes happening silently behind the blood-brain barrier, and that decline does not happen at random. The hippocampus, where insulin receptors are most densely concentrated, is the very first area to be affected. That is why the earliest symptom of Alzheimer's is always short-term memory loss, not long-term memory loss. Yesterday's memories vanish long before memories from 50 years ago. A patient might forget what they ate this morning, but perfectly remember the name of their childhood friend. This is not some random quirk of the pathology. This is a map of brain insulin resistance progressing through the areas with the highest density of insulin receptors first. Standard lab tests like fasting blood sugar, hemoglobin A1C, and even post-meal glucose all measure insulin resistance in your muscle tissue, fat tissue, and liver. They do not measure insulin signaling in the brain. The brain sits behind the blood-brain barrier, a highly selective filtration system that separates the brain from your peripheral circulation. A person can have a fasting blood sugar level of 85 milligrams per deciliter, which is completely within the normal range, and a hemoglobin A1C of 5.1%, be told by their doctor that there is absolutely nothing to worry about, and still be developing significant brain insulin resistance that no conventional tool can detect. People with metabolic syndrome, characterized by insulin resistance, chronically high blood sugar, high triglycerides, and low high-density lipoprotein, have a measurably higher risk of developing Alzheimer's compared to those with a healthy metabolism, even when controlling for all other risk factors. This is not a weak correlation. It is strong enough that over the past 10 years, more and more neurologists have been arguing that metabolic health should be the primary focus of Alzheimer's prevention, not genetics, not medication. And this is where the story becomes undeniable. Because the first person to name this connection did not come from the field of endocrinology. She came from neuropathology, and what she found in brain tissue changed how a small group of scientists view this disease forever. In 2005, neuropathologist Suzanne de la Monte at Brown University was analyzing the brain tissue of deceased Alzheimer's patients. She was not looking for a connection to diabetes. She was looking for any molecular abnormality that could explain the accumulation of amyloid. What she found was stark insulin resistance at a cellular level, degraded insulin receptors, a completely broken insulin signaling cascade, and the exact same molecular markers she had seen in the tissue of type 2 diabetic patients. Yet these patients did not have diabetes. Many of them had no documented metabolic issues whatsoever while they were alive. The insulin resistance in their brains had developed silently, a completely separate metabolic pathology occurring behind the blood-brain barrier, undetected by any standard testing. She called it type 3 diabetes. This is the signal most people miss. Alzheimer's does not just come looking for you. It is built, year by year, glucose spike by glucose spike, in total silence. So now that you understand why this is happening, here is how you change it. The first step is controlling the magnitude of your post-meal glucose spikes, not the total amount of carbohydrates you eat. Brain insulin resistance is not built by a single high-carbohydrate meal. It is built by repeated glucose spikes over many years. Each time glucose spikes, insulin surges along with it, exposing receptors to constantly high insulin levels, which causes them to lose sensitivity little by little. The goal is not to eliminate carbohydrates from your diet. The goal is to flatten your post-meal glucose curve. There are three interventions that have been studied the most in this area. Walking for 10 to 15 minutes after a meal, not a power walk, just moving around, reduces your post-meal glucose peak by up to 30% by activating glucose receptors in skeletal muscle without needing insulin. Eating protein and fats before carbohydrates during the same meal. This is about the food order, not the food amount. Significantly changes the absorption rate by slowing down gastric emptying. Taking 1 to 2 tablespoons, which is about 15 to 30 milliliters, of apple cider vinegar in water before a meal. A study from Arizona State University confirms its effect in lowering post-meal glucose peaks by inhibiting the amylase enzyme that digests starch. The second step is creating periods of low insulin to give the brain a chance to restore receptor sensitivity. The brain restores its insulin sensitivity during periods of low insulin, the exact same principle as the rest of the body, but with a unique advantage. When the body shifts to producing ketones during a state of prolonged fasting, typically after 12 to 14 hours of not eating, ketones become an alternative fuel source that the brain can use completely independently of insulin signaling. They cross the blood-brain barrier without needing a key. The power plants that were being starved of fuel because their delivery doors were broken suddenly get a second supply line. This is one of the reasons why so many Alzheimer's researchers are studying ketogenic interventions, not as a weight loss diet, but as a form of alternative neurological fuel therapy. The third step involves 3 specific nutrients with proven evidence of protecting insulin signaling in the brain. Docosahexaenoic acid omega-3, commonly referred to as DHA, is a primary structural component of neuronal membranes, directly affecting membrane fluidity and therefore the functionality of the insulin receptors embedded in them. Long-term follow-up studies show that individuals with high blood levels of DHA have a measurably lower risk of cognitive decline. Magnesium is a cofactor in over 300 enzymatic reactions, including the entire signaling chain downstream from the insulin receptor, and the vast majority of adults are deficient in it without knowing, because standard blood magnesium tests do not reflect cellular magnesium stores. Berberine, a compound derived from certain plants that has been used in traditional medicine for centuries, is being actively studied in the context of Alzheimer's for its ability to improve neuronal insulin sensitivity and inhibit amyloid accumulation through the exact same molecular pathways. The power plants in your city are still there. The fuel distribution system has not collapsed, but the delivery doors of each power plant are changing a little bit every year, silently, with no conventional test catching it. And the window to intervene before those changes become irreversible is not infinite. Your body is not broken. It is responding. Now you have the breakdown. There is one more variable in this equation that we have not touched on today, and it might just be the most important variable in the entire story. While you sleep, your brain runs a completely separate cleanup system called the glymphatic system, a network of channels that opens up only during deep sleep to wash away the exact toxic proteins we just talked about. And there is an incredibly common habit that shuts that system down every single night. Something most people are doing without realizing what it actually means. That is our next decode. Comment the word decode if someone in your family has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And during every single conversation with the doctor afterward, no one mentioned blood sugar, insulin resistance, or metabolic health even once.